Romany and Raq by G Bramwell Evens. Give me the clear blue sky over my head and the green turf beneath my feet, a winding road before me, and then to thinking. Chapter 5. The Art of Making Butter. February. I live in a city. My work is there and I love it. Were it not for the rush and excitement of town life, I hardly think I should appreciate the countryside as I do. City life acts as a foil to what I find in the fields. When I set my face towards the open country, I leave speed and rush far behind, and find myself in a world where time limits are not supreme. I felt this as Raq and I sat in the kitchen of the farm, though this, perchance, is the one place in the countryside where bustle still reigns. There is not much holiday for the women folk on a farm. From early morn until the afternoon milking is over, they have little time to themselves. Hannah and Charlotte are no exception to the rule. They have others to help them, it is true, but on a farm the mistress works as hard as the servant, and their hours are longer. Yet even in the kitchen there is no suggestion of frenzied haste. They work until their task is done, not as we in the city do, until the time of some evening entertainment or social duty calls us out. Tick, tock, tick, tock, I hear the old grandfather clock say. Its beat is leisurely, measured. My clock at home ticks as though every second were trying to overtake time itself. When it strikes the hour it does so suddenly, stabbing the quiet of the house with an alarm note and with the arrogance of a tyrant. But the farm clock says, take time, and the pendulum seems to linger at the apex of each swing. Even when it strikes the hours it gives warning. There is a whirring of inner machinery, as though the wheels inside were awakening from a nap, as though they had to be reminded that they were needed at least once in the hour. Through the window I see also the tonic of timelessness. The horses are walking up the track that leads to the high barn. Bob, Alan's man, is by their side. Now and then they stop to sniff at some herbage by the hedge side, and Bob lights his pipe. A word and they are off again until they come to a closed gate, where they stand patiently until it slowly swings back. Their work lies over the brow of the hill. They will get there, sometime. Clip, clop, clippity-clop. I can hear their hooves striking against the rocky surface of the road. The sound has the same unhurried beat which marks the old clock. There is a door at the far end of the farm kitchen. This leads into a kind of small larder. Then a few steps descend into the stony flagged dairy with its broad slate shelves. Here stands the churn, and as I sat by the fire I could see Charlotte grasping its handle and hear the rhythmic thud of its contents. As Alan and Joe were out, I went to have a look at Charlotte making her butter. Is it nearly ready? I asked. Charlotte shook her head. It takes longer in cold weather, she answered with a smile, pausing from her work for a moment and pressing a knob on the top of the barrel. Sounds as though you've punctured the thing, I said, as I heard a fizzing noise coming from the knob. I'm only letting the gas out, she answered, giving the screws which fastened on the lid an extra twist or two. What temperature ought the cream to be when you start churning? I asked. Oh, about 56 to 60 degrees, she answered. Of course, in summer the difficulty is keeping it cool. There's always something to contend with. In winter it's slow work because the cream is cold. But the great thing in churning is to get your cream well mixed before you start. Then it's fairly plain sailing. I'll take the handle for a minute or two, if you like, I said. I stressed a minute or two, for I have learned a few things in my time. First of all, that which to a townsman looks so easy often proves exhausting in a few minutes. Also, if you take over any job from Charlotte, she doesn't stand by idly watching. She herself starts some other work, and you are left to finish what you have begun. This is what actually did happen in spite of my hinting at a time limit. I found myself turning. The first few minutes were easy going. Then I found myself changing hands, for my right shoulder was feeling the strain. Then, when the left gave out, I went back to the right grip again. But the right soon got tired, so I took hold of the handle and churned with both hands, whilst all my underclothing gradually crept upwards until it ringed itself in a solid tourniquet round my neck. I found my thoughts turning with sympathy to men who spend long hours gripping handles. Pity the poor organ blowers in our churches, I thought, and I made up my mind that I would in future choose more CMs, common meters, than 88888, 6/8. Then, too, I would have wept when I thought of thousands of wives who toil at the mangles on washing day. Then Hannah came to have a look at me. At first I thought I was to be reprieved, but I saw that her hands were covered with flour, and I groaned inwardly. "How are you getting on?" she asked. "Fine," I said gallantly, wiping my brow. "Is it nearly ready?" "Charlotte'll be back in a minute," said she cheerily, and went back to her cooking. I started to churn again. "In a minute," Hannah had said. "I know those country minutes. They are like country miles, which are town miles multiplied by 5. That is the worst of being in the country. Time is so slow. I found myself turning the churn to poetry. Lines of Tom Hood fitted in with its revolutions. Churn, 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 while the cock is crowing aloof, and churn, 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 till the stars shine through the roof. It's oh to be a slave, along with a barbarous Turk, where woman has never a soul to save, if this is Christian work." I looked through the door. Glorious sound! I heard the voices of Alan and Joe, and Charlotte telling them I was in the dairy, churning. With a new spirit of energy I seized the handle. "Oh, men with sisters dear! Oh, men with mothers and wives! It's not your churn you're wearing out, but human creatures' lives." In another minute I saw the smiling faces of the two brothers beaming at me through the door. The next moment the churn was idle, and we were shaking hands, and Joe was thumping me on the back with the heartiest of welcomes. "Isn't it ready?" said I, enquiringly. Charlotte took the lid off, and I gazed in, expecting to see great pounds of butter floating in a sea of whey. But all I could see was a quantity of creamy liquid that had little sign of butter in it. "It's not ready yet," and looking at me, she added, "I've known it take almost half a day sometimes in winter." As she said this I edged away from the handle, and I was relieved when I saw Joe take hold of it. With an ease which comes from practice, he turned it as though he could go on untiringly for a month. "Haven't you a drop of nuclear in the house?" asked Alan. "That'd hurry it up a bit, I reckon." Charlotte shook her head, and I wondered what nuclear was. I thought that it was some patent mixture which hurried on the process of butter making. I was on the point of asking it when Alan said, "Nuclear, you know, is cream for a newly calved cow. You just mix a little with the rest in the churn, and there you are." Fearful lest I might be asked to start again, I slipped into the kitchen. From my comfortable corner I could see Joe turning the churn. Later I heard Charlotte say that it was broken. Then I heard the sound of running liquid and knew that the whey was being run off. Just before we sat down to dinner, Charlotte, to my surprise, scolded her hands, saying, "It keeps the butter from sticking to them, you know." "And what more have you to do?" "Oh," she said, "not a great deal. Just work the water out of it, and work salt into it, and then knock it into shape with Scotch hands." "And how much do you get for a pound of it?" I asked. "Oh, 1 and 9 a pound," she replied. "How much do you pay for it in town?" "I don't know," I answered. "That is my wife's department. The study has no dealings with the kitchen, you know." You'll give up to 1/2 crown, I reckon, said Alan. It's not the farmer who's making the profit, he added, shaking his head ruefully. Thinking of that terrible handle and my aching shoulders, I said, I should want 4 and 6 a pound if I had the making of it, whereat they all laughed and we gathered round the table. Ever heard the yarn of the old couple who lived here before my grandfather, how he made butter? Asked Joe. I shook my head. He were a very careful man, said Alan with a sly wink at me, and stressing a careful a little. Well, said Joe, the old woman used to put cream in the churn and leave it standing all night. With the lid off, added Charlotte. Aye, said Joe, with the lid off. Well, next morning she fixed the lid on, and the old man started a churn. He noticed that it didn't go round with its usual swing, and he called out, Mother, what's wrong with churn? Nowt wrong as far as I know, replied the old lady. But he persisted with that, summat were up with it. So she came and took the lid off, and they both looked in. Joe paused for a moment, and Charlotte and Hannah looked gravely at me. Alan was gazing up at the ceiling and rubbing the back of his head. What's that black thing floating round? Asked the old man. That's not butter. The old lady stared into the churn with eyes that stuck out like organ stops. Sakes alive, she said, it's our cat. Dead as a turnip, added Alan. Joe nodded. Then, as she took the drowned beast and were about to throw it away, it fell in during the night, said Hannah quietly. Aye, said Joe, it had. Well, as she were about to throw it away, the old man called out, Stripe her, mother, stripe her. Stripe her? I questioned, whereat everyone had a good laugh. He meant, said Charlotte, scrape all the cream off her so as not to waste any. He were a very careful man, said Alan, giving me another wink.